So like I said, my name is Jessica West. I'm really happy to be here talking to you about scaling and measuring your developer relations program. If you have any questions, please use the chat in the YouTube chat, or feel free to on Twitter using the hashtag DevRelAsia. So we'll go ahead and get started. So many of us, we're coming here to DevRel Asia because either you have a program that you're looking at starting for developer relations at your company. Maybe you are looking into getting to developer relations yourself, and you're wondering, where to start. And oftentimes that can be the most challenging part. And even beyond starting, how do we measure what the efficiency is? Like, how do we see that we talk to the company and communicate the value of developer relations to them, and talk through what is developer relations, and how do we say, here are all the different things that we say that are successful, are born from it. So we're going to go through that today. So, with this, a lot of things, like communities are at the core of what we do. We have communities everywhere, and this is starting from day one, even before, the internet was a big popular thing, and having discourse or Discord. But we have used communities, we've had them around since the beginning of time. We always have congregated to have that other connection with people. And we think about, what is community at the core? It's a group of people that have a similar idea or collective, and they come together to talk about something that they have maybe a passion or a goal in common. Quite oftentimes we look at, communities now, we say, like, I'm going to go find, this language community here online, or I'm going to go to a conference and I'm going to go try and find them and understand what they're doing and how I should engage with them. And our role as developer relations professionals is to work with those communities and to talk with them about what we do and what we represent from our company, and try and find the best solution for them. But a lot of that is that human interaction, right? It's the human point of finding myself and another of that conversation. And that can be really challenging when we look at how do we translate that to business value. So like I mentioned, we have now, from where we had communities before, it was we'd have to go out to find them, and we'd have to go out and discover, were they on even like just IRC channels. We always had them out there, but now they're at our fingertips. So we have it through Zoom, Slack, everything, especially during, COVID pandemic times. We are having all of our communities online. We're having these conversations online, and it's a different experience, but it's still engaging with your community. And that's something that's really important. So again, when we have those ones we have communities at our fingertips, how do we start to measure them? How do we say, what's the best way of saying that I had a really great conversation with someone at a conference, or I had a really great conversation with them on Twitter, and we went back and forth and we talked through what's the best JavaScript library out there, and how would I get started with, we'll use feature flags as an example, because that's the company I work for, LaunchDarkly. And, if you're having all these great conversations, they're amazing. And you can go back and tell them in your event recaps, this was so great. I had a great conversation, and, I did my job. But what your executive wants to know is, how do I measure that? And really, that's the big question. And really, if we look at it, you don't. We can't measure human connection. We can't say arbitrarily, Joe and Sandy to the left had a great conversation versus, Jessica and Azushi to the right? No one can tell us really how you measure those ones. So when we look at that and we have those authentic conversations that we're looking at, how do we measure that in relation to everything else? We realize that that's not at the core of what we want to measure. And we think about this, like, all these activities that you do are really part of your story, and that adds conversations. Those conversations kind of add flavor. So these conversations, while are very valuable and authentic, that's not at the core of, like, what's the activity that you're doing. And you use those conversations as a contextual point, saying that I interacted with this community member here that has this amount of measurement, like of them, the audience, and because of that, we had XYZ conversations. And we're really able to think about these things in a much more like measured way. Also, I'm a big foodie, so there'll be some food pictures in the slides, and I hope that you like them and hope that you're not too hungry at the end. So, talking about measuring your presence, there's a number of ways we can do that within developer relations that really like talks about what we're doing, where we're doing it, and how we're working through these things. So marketing, there's a lot of traffic data that we can look at. Engineering, we're looking at adoption and data from your products. Sales, ARR, lead attachment, and developer relations, tracking, what activities you're doing. And all those first three data points, those are things that those departments are already tracking, right? They're already looking at that traffic data. Engineering already knows about the adoption, and sales knows about the ARR and their lead attachment. But what developer relations can do is bring all that into one big picture. So there's a lot of activities that we bring to the table that in a lot of ways like that influence these, right? But it's because it's spread across so many different departments. It can be oftentimes challenging to say, where do I start? How do I start bringing these things in there? And how do I attribute my work towards these activities? And that's where it comes into that fourth point of developer relations. And I realize I have my mouse on here, so I'll use that one. And developer relations, tracking those activities, that's a core of like what we are understanding. And by tracking those activities, we can start seeing what types of blog posts, like what types of content I put out there, what type of things lined up with those different SDKs and adoption from our whatever we're working as our engineering product, and what sales calls was it I involved in. Now, I put this big variety of items on here because I recognize that developer relations oftentimes looks different at every single company, and that's totally okay because I think that that's actually better because we should be helping adapt to whatever the company really needs. Like we're coming here to say, what do we need to do for you to connect to your communities? And that'll look different at every company, and it should because that's how each company has their unique presence. So let's keep going. So I want to talk about the impact over numbers. Oftentimes you'll say, I went to 5 conferences, I gave this many blog posts, and you're going through like tracking those activities. While that can be really beneficial, it can actually be really challenging, really hard to talk about what your true measurement is, because you could have a really great blog post that takes you 2 weeks, or you could be writing blog posts every single day. And which one do you think is going to have a better traction of SEO over time? So here I put in 3 different programs that we can look at. Program 1, oftentimes this is what we see as like a base starting point for developer relations programs. Maybe they're not even tracking it. So let's start. You want to start producing? I wrote 5 blogs. I gave 5 talks, and I'm going to hire 2 developer advocates. So we're looking at these, setting this as like a project plan or OKRs from a management perspective. We look at published program 2. So say, okay, I'm going to publish these 2, like these developer focused blogs. So we've gotten a little bit closer. We're saying that we're talking to our developer audience, not just our audience in general. And I want to give 5 product focused talks. Again, better than just general talks, and it's product focused. So we're getting better. We're narrowing down what the type of impact your team is having based on these activities. And hire developer advocates, just keep hiring them. They're always hard to find. Now, program 3, and this is my favorite one. I think this is where we really see a big change in how we talk about what our activities are and how they translate. This is where we can have the real true understanding from the executive board, understanding what is it that you're doing and why. So if I can go to my CEO and say, I reached 15,000 unique developers through this really great blog post. And look, they continue going and they came in here from this keyword. That's huge, right? That's a much better story that I can talk to my executive team, and also that I can tell my team that they are working on rich content that's reaching developers over and over again versus telling them to arbitrarily write a blog post. And the other one, engaging, let's say with 5,000 developers through different speaking opportunities. So, what does that look like? Is that choosing 5, let's say 5 1,000 events, 5 local ones, maybe doing 15 local events or 3 targeted ones? These are all really things to think about and using your value of time and that impact. And the third one, increasing advocacy output efforts 2x by adding different developer advocates. That's something that is going to be an advanced metric, and you won't have that until you're able to collect data and truly see, okay, when I hire this type of developer advocate at this level, I can see output changes by X. But we don't see any of that until we start tracking. And when we start thinking about that impact over numbers, so you don't track just what you did, but truly what was the impact that you had and where did you get that? So this is where you really want to make marketing your friend. Talk with them about what they're doing, how do they talk with different events, how's their blog posts, get access to all those analytics. And also in turn, making engineering and product part of your feedback cycle. How are you getting that product out there, and how are you talking with the engineering team? Sorry. So, like I mentioned, so these are the three, the couple things that you can focus on. From marketing, Google Analytics is a great place to start. If you can get access, if someone's pulling reports, again, this is dependent on wherever you are and wherever your company's at. But this is really key because it really helps for you to identify what you're working on and saying, hey, what is this blog post? How is this driving data over time? Social activity, maybe getting impressions from any kind of analytics from Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, anything that your company's using to measure that impact of whatever posts that are going out, and then specifically to your team. And event data, that's the number of people that have attended the event, maybe the people that are attended the specific talk, and you can bring all that into tracking those activities. Engineering, a great one to talk to them is about your count queries. So how many people are using that specific language, SDK, the integration, or attach rate, whatever that looks like for your platform, your product, is important to look at. How are you helping influence that, and what are those different activities that you can line back up to it? So digging into written content and marketing, we talked about this a little bit more already, but the number of unique visitors that you connect to your Google Analytics, incoming traffic sources, that's really important too. Like, how did that user land on the page? Was it from a partner piece of content? Was it through keywords? Was it from someone you got highlighted in an email newsletter? These are all really good things to know for how your efforts are hitting that impact. Time spent in the article is a really great indicator of how long people are staying there. So it's a really long article, and maybe they're popping off early, and that means because something didn't quite translate. Or even better, they're there for that full time, and maybe even longer because they're going back over and combing through your article and trying to find information that they want to use and then bookmark later. These are all great things that help us analyze how people are interacting with our product, and what you want to do to help change that impact. And it also helps create a story. These are all little things that help create a story when you're creating these dashboards later on. Video content is huge right now. I mean, here we are on a virtual conference, and this is something at the end of the day, I can go back and talk to my boss and say, I spoke at this conference. Here's how many people came to my talk. Here's how many people were at the event total. And I can see, where people were at. Granted, this is a third-party event, as that goes in events and webinars, but if you're a personal one, you can start looking at all the different things through engagement graphs. Like, where did that user pop off? Did they stay the whole time? Did they pause? Did they start in areas? And then you can start seeing how that is and tweaking your content. Through podcasts and streaming content, the number one thing basically is looking at, the number of downloads, subscribers, unique viewers, and really look at how people are interacting with you and that number. And we want to track that. Engineering, this is a great one. Looking at product usage. What's the number of attach rates to your partner integrations? Maybe your SDK usage. What communities are thriving and which ones need help. This is a great indicator to see what things look like over time and how you can change your behavior. Or you can see, hey, there's a big gap that I can help with by providing more content around it. And it helps is there anything broken, within your library? And this also for tracking by account type. This is really interesting to see how your trial is working and what happens from someone going from trial to a paid account. And this is something that's very interesting to your engineering org, and also, again, something that your developer relations team can help influence and work through. Then account by persona, this is, again, one of the things is you can look at your targeted efforts and what you're doing to help bring things there. And last, open source demos. Love this. I think that the more open we can be with our data, the better. That's part of, at the core of what communities are, is sharing information so we can all be better and so we can all learn from each other. So creating this kind of content around your product as best you can is really huge. And you can look at how people are interacting with that. So measuring that one, like the number of stars that are on the repo, maybe the amount of account signups specific to that repo. And if using something like Glitch, the number of remixes. Sales. This is a small side. This is only one, and that's very intentional, because while there's a lot of partnership that can happen between developer relations and sales, it shouldn't be at the core of what you're measured against. It's something that you can talk about influencing and saying, this is a portion of what I did and helped bring a lead and went through that. But it absolutely, in my opinion, should not be translated to your direct activities or your value that you bring to the team, because that's a different persona and that's not what we're doing for developer relations. We're looking on the short and long-term tail, but we're not working on how do you understand our data and how do you sell it, right? We're trying to talk through that top of the funnel, not the very bottom when we're converting them, and we don't want to have that association there. So with developer relations, we've talked about a lot of different things, and this again looks different at so many different companies, but really it comes down to, in my opinion, these four types of categories. I call them like my 4 C's in my reports. I call them, code, content, community, and company when I go through it every iterative. But for this purpose, we'll talk through each section. So we've got speaking, coding, writing, team collaboration. There's so much that your team can do and so much to be a part of. So tracking these types of activities and relaying it back into how you can measure it is huge. And it also helps paint a really beautiful story for your company and for your executives to understand truly the big efforts that your whole company, that your team works on. So we've gone through a lot, right? So let's take a step back and look at every single data point that we're collecting. And so each data point is really valid on its own, right? The unique visitors to a blog post is important. And that's something that marketing really wants to look at. And looking at how people work with our product and the engineering side is important. Having that sales influence AR, these are all really relevant stories and points of it. But bringing this all together under one point and kind of one umbrella of these like the activities, starting with the core, like what are the activities that the developer relations team is doing? And what is that influencing at each one? And how do we measure all that? That creates that big viewpoint. That's what creates the big picture. And so it's really important for us to get these types of data points and then look at how that is coming together to make people understand the full value and the full true impact of what we can do in developer relations. So we'll go through a use case of how we can use these kind of metrics and data to influence what's happened in the DevRel space. So let's say your developer relations person your manager's looking at all of the data and they see that there's a dip in some data. And so we see some numbers for argument's sake. We've got 5,000 adoption for the month of November. And from the month of October, we were actually at 8,000. So what was that 3,000 gap? What happened for that adoption rate so that we had a drop in 3,000 active users? So let's just say that was in the JavaScript SDK. So we recognized that there was a gap in that community. So we then because we're tracking that, we're looking at it, we tasked an advocate to take the next quarter to say, okay, I'm going to look at what that gap was. I realized, and from the gap, doing that research, recognizing that, it's because there was a bug or because there was a new language that came out and we don't support it. So we needed to change that. And because they had that research, because they have that knowledge, then they're able to help create a resource around it. And then they're able to go to the marketing department and say, hey, help me. I just wrote this really great blog post and I've got this demo talking about the hottest new thing on React and Vue. Can you help me push it forward? And the marketing department says, yes, I absolutely can, because new content, DevRel signed me up. And they then amplify it. So then we are then tracking numbers from the unique visitors, right? And that GitHub repo. And that's when we're in that analyzation phase. So we look at, so here's the number of visitors that we have in the blog post. Here's the number of people that starred that repo. And now further, what's happening with the adoption, right? Is the adoption upticking? How are we seeing that? Like, is anything changing? And then we can then iterate. But all that gives us the ability to kind of showcase the problem and that solution and results. And it gives, again, a great story to your whole company about what are you doing to help close that gap? How are you like taking that impact from the community and bringing it forward? And how are you measuring that to show the value of what you're working on? This is the biggest thing that we can actually do as professionals. And quite oftentimes we get so busy on working in the community and doing our work, and we're so excited and so passionate about doing it. And we're like, yes, we're doing it. We're great. I helped this person. I feel really good. But sometimes we have to forget that we have to be our own developer. Like, we have to be our own advocates within our company, right? And part of that is communicating and iterating on that communication. So we have to make sure that we're communicating consistently and frequently. So not only our executives, but our peers understand what we're up to. This creates a whole level of collaboration. It opens things up for people to understand, oh, I see that someone on Jessica's team is working on this library. Oh, that's really cool. I actually have a customer call that's working on this. It'd be great for us to connect. But that conversation wouldn't necessarily happen without that communication going outward and saying, here's all the things I'm working on. And you can do that through multiple ways. Mary has a book that she spoke earlier, and talks through the different ways of you communicating. And I know I've given a talk before as well on all the different points that you can have your hour communication to your company about what you're doing and what your team's doing. And that's step one, right? Communicating and then iterating and making consistent so they know that, like, okay, every month I'm going to get a report from Jessica's team and I understand what I'm going to get there. Or maybe it's every quarter, or whatever cadence works for you and your team, but be consistent about it. Just the way we would be consistent with our communities and asking them to engage with us, we have to do the same for our company. The biggest one is also instantiating a feedback loop with our stakeholders. So making sure you have, maybe those asynchronous meetings or those daily stand-ups with, your stakeholders in product marketing, maybe in events, in demand gen, in engineering, different engineering squads, in product delivery, all these things for people to understand truly, what are you working on? How can they help? And what are they working on? And how can you help make sure that your go-to market strategy is even stronger? Because ultimately, we're here to help serve not only our communities, but also help our company be more successful and having those authentic conversations. And so being open for that and having that information from stakeholders is huge. And with all of this, I know that many of us have changed and being open to this, but being open to that feedback and change to say sometimes what you need in Q1, your company needs in Q1, is different from what they need in Q4. And that's completely okay. And we should be able to open to changing and adding different points of feedback so that we can make sure we bring that to the table. So, like I said, treat your company like your community because they deserve it, right? So, where to start? This is a lot, and there are so many different points of starting point for where you want to start with your team, especially if you're not tracking anything. But the first thing is just doing some investigative work. So finding out where the data lives within your company reporting. Are they reporting on all these metrics that we mentioned earlier? Are they looking at that individual traffic? Are they looking at the adoption for the SDKs? Are they even looking at, where's the data for sales and trial adoption and things like that? And from there, take some time to really make sense what makes sense for your department. You don't have to rush in and have an answer day one, but take some time and say, okay, I'm going to establish baseline. I just have to understand it. And you want to make sure that you understand where that's coming from, and maybe you have some work to make sure that you start measuring. Or it might already be there, so you just need to add yourself as a subscriber. It really depends on which company you're at. And from that, once you decide, okay, this is how I'm going to start measuring, get buy-in from your stakeholders. Say, hey, I'm going to start working and tracking these things, and here's what I see as really a value add for the company and for you specifically. Do you agree? and make sure that they're acting as like your champions within the company as well, because they're going to help that word of mouth when someone's asking, what's developer relations up to, they can say, oh, they're working on XYZ, because you're not always going to be there for that. And really start small. Start measuring like traffic and product usage baseline. That's number one. That is, when I say start small, those are those two things, but that is a huge, huge change, especially if you've never been tracking anything. And you can see so much just from those two types of data. Really just looking at the number of unique visitors to your blog posts and everything else, and looking at those activities, that gives you a bigger insight into what the team is working on and the impact they're driving. And part of this, reporting progress to your company and like rally them around and get them excited about what is this team working on. How does that impact? Like, what are the things that we're hearing from the field? And bring all these different authentic conversations that we talked about at the very beginning and use that to talk throughout this data. Because we've got all these numbers, right? But what we want to also bring in is like lay in those insights, lay in those trends, and use those authentic conversations as a way of presenting the data, of understanding like, here's the numbers and here's the conversations around it, and this is what it means. So with that, we want to keep iterating. And so really the true benefit of having what we have right now with everything online versus offline is that tracking and measuring your department's success has never been easier. So with that, I'd say my rallying cry to all of you is let's build some dashboards. And arigato gozaimasu. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here, and I love that we're still able to participate even right now in remote times. So thank you very much.